Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As you all know, my name's Lesley. I'm the Managing Director of APSCO Australia. And today I am joined by Mandy Palore, Head of Sales and Key Accounts at IMS People Possible and a long-term offshoring partner of APSCO Australia. And Rod Hore, familiar face to everyone I would imagine on this call, founder of HHMC Global and all-round recruitment aficionado, I think we could say there safely. Good morning to you both. Today we are going to be talking about offshoring and counting the real cost. I think it'll be no surprise to anybody that cost continues to be a challenge in the market, particularly at the moment, I would say. And so this is something that I think is a topic that's closely attached to the notion of offshoring. So what we've decided to do today is really break down what that looks like for you and give you some really practical takeaways on the true sense of offshoring and what it can mean in terms of impact financially to your business and obviously outcomes in terms of efficiencies and scaling. So I might get Hina to open to the first slide. I just want to remind you all, obviously this is being recorded. We will send out the slides as usual. And also we will have a little slot later on in the session for questions. So if you do have questions, put them in the chat box as usual, and we will get to them. But first of all, I just want to run through what Mandy and Rod are going to be covering for you today. So obviously the first one here is when cost savings actually show. Moving to actual cost of low cost offshoring, and there'll be some really practical breakdown here for you to take away on what that looks like, the metrics that actually matter and what you should be looking for and asking, and how poor design destroys margins, which is going to be very interesting indeed. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Rod and get you to kick off, Rod. Thank you.
Thanks, Lesley. I'm always wait with bated breath to see how you might introduce me. So something new every time, which is interesting. Look, for those that don't know, I've been badgering on about offshore outsourcing for probably 15 to 20 years now. And I first picked up this going to some overseas conferences a long time ago, and came back to Australia and started talking to recruitment agencies about it, and maybe didn't reach with that much enthusiasm. But over the last 5 years, and not related to the COVID time, there has certainly been an increased attention paid to what offshoring might be and how it might impact the industry. And we've got I suppose a much broader and more sophisticated conversation going on about it now, which is really good. In some ways, you could say that Australia has caught up to what the rest of the world is doing, and it's a really important part of the conversation with companies now about their strategy and how they work. Now, why the conversation matters now is because I think it's really well documented that, and by lots and lots of commentators, that all businesses are dealing with uncertainty more than we would normally expect. And that some of the things that we've been doing in the past don't necessarily work as easily as we would like them to, and we need to be looking for different solutions, and some of those solutions need to be quite sophisticated. And for staffing agencies, both large and small, there's very few times when you can come up with a simple solution that is going to solve the problem that you've got on your desk as a leader. So it's very rare that you could, for example, implement a piece of technology that would solve a problem for you. It may partially solve a problem, but it usually needs a more sophisticated solution. Again, changing internal staff or restructuring, or even how you're going to win new clients and how you might solve a new client's challenge. They're not easily resolved activities anymore. And it seems like on a month-by-month basis, everything is getting just a little bit more complex. And on top of that, some of these complex solutions that we're having to, or complex situations that we're having to deal with, are coming within an environment of, if not reduced margins, then more complex delivery, where maybe you're not getting the returns and the productivity that you were before. And getting a sophisticated solution to work in this area covers a whole range of things. Okay, so one is your technology set is quite unique to you and how you go about things. So sometimes there is not an immediate solution that you might see another organization working with because your environment is quite unique. Certainly your leadership and your processes and your values and all of the things that make you a unique organization are quite different. Your internal staff and how they're working and how they're organized and structured and what the processes are and how they're rewarded, that's all sometimes quite unique to you. But people are looking to combine all of those things now with an offshore solution environment. So as you can see, there's a lot of moving parts. And that's, I suppose, what we're going to get into is that it's a complex solution that needs a little bit of attention, a little bit of pre-thought, some planning, some structure, and certainly some implementation. And none of that is about, I'm going to get a VA to help me with some admin. Okay, now that is sometimes a valid solution, but it's not necessarily what we're talking about today. We're talking about something that is much more integrated within your environment. So just to sort of reinforce that, this Australian industry group product or report that they put out, if you haven't seen it, it's worth going and chasing and having a read of. It was really interesting to look about what your clients might be doing and how they responded to the surveys that the Australian Industry Group put out. It's fair to say that they're having some challenges, and not all of those organisations are positive about the year in front of them. It's not an all-out growth, all-out new products, all-out expansion. A lot of it is about trying to be better at what they are and being very careful with their investment. So not a huge number of people are expecting growth of the products and services they provide. And one of the main reasons for that is that some of the staff issues are really driving or holding them back. Okay, so you could say that it's the best of time for recruiters because your clients need you. But the way that they need you is probably a little bit different in the past. They're not coming to you because they've got lots of growth opportunities and they're having a bit of difficulty finding those things. They're coming to you because they've got problems about how their clients are working and how they're trying to provide their services. And so they're trying to provide an upskill. They're trying to maintain their staff. They're trying to do things in a complex environment. And they need a partner like you as a recruitment agency to work with them. So there is a skill gap out there. There's shortages. We all talk about it all the time. But how it impacts our clients is possibly a little different to what it did in the past. They certainly need you. That's probably the bottom line. And there is no doubt that both within the staffing industry and within our clients, we've really got some challenges where the year is grinding people down. The period post-COVID is really grinding people down. Rod Hore have done some great research in this area. 80% is a very, very big number where people are feeling overworked, maybe not overworked, but feeling the effects of heavy workloads. And many within the staffing industry and within the staffing industry's clients are dealing with insufficient staff. They just don't have the people in the right positions to be able to do the things that they want to do. So it all sets an environment where there's a need out there for the staffing industry. They want us to help them, but how we go about it is also challenging, and offshoring can be part of the solution for that, and that's what we want to talk about today. Thanks, Hina.
Thanks, Rod. So the hidden cost of low-cost offshoring, that's what. So there are different models that many companies go for. And right now we'll be talking about low-cost offshoring and what it really costs you. So most leaders think offshoring is about cost, and it's not. If cost was the problem, the industry would have solved it already. The real constraint today is delivery. Most offshoring conversation starts with hourly rate, and that's where the problem begins. Hourly rate is incomplete. Hourly rate tells you about what you pay, not what you lose. So lower cost often comes at the expense of quality and compliance. What does that look like in reality is more rework, more errors, higher candidate drop-offs. And the part no one talks about is brand risk. Because inconsistent delivery doesn't just slow you down. It changes how client perceives you. meaning this model can quietly lead to a costly outcome. So that's where the problem begins and the brand risk as well. Thank you, Hina. So let's talk about the matrix that actually matters. This is the wrong question when we talk about how cheap is offshore. And that's exactly where things go wrong. When cost becomes the primary metric, three things typically follow. Unclear workflow ownership, which means there's no clarity on who is accountable for outcome. No success matrix. So activity is tracked, but impact isn't. No QA or feedback loop. Mistakes repeat. Quality never compounds. So you don't scale by reducing cost. You scale by improving outcomes per action. So the real question is not how cheap is offshore. What measurable outcome is it delivering for my business? Now let's shift to the one. The agencies winning today are not tracking cost per hour. They're tracking speed to shortlist, submission to interview ratio, revenue per recruiter, because those are the metrics that actually move the business. So let's talk about how outcome does offshoring deliver? Meaning the right question has to be, what outcomes does offshoring deliver consistently and at scale? Because that's where the real ROI sits. So let's shift the lens from labor arbitrage to business outcomes. So what you should actually measure? Cost per outcome delivered, not cost per hour, cost per successful outcome. Because optimizing spend only matters if the delivers tangible results. Revenue enabled per offshore FTE, one of the most overlooked metrics. So how much revenue is each offshore resource unlocking? That's the question that needs to be discussed and asked. Because the right offshore model doesn't just support delivery, it amplifies top line growth. Then we talk about the return or to onshore team. This is where the real multiplier sits. So every hour saved on admin is an hour invested in client conversations, candidate engagement, deal closure. So you're not reducing workload, you're scaling leadership impact. We talk about retention, tenure, and knowledge depth. The strongest offshore model don't just deliver output, they build institutional knowledge. So longer tenure means you have better quality, faster turnaround, and less retraining. And over time, your offshore team becomes a true extension of your business, not just a revolving door. So when you start measuring these, offshore stops being a cost decision, it becomes a growth strategy. So the question is, are you measuring cost or are you measuring impact? Let's talk about the different services that's being outsourced. Hina, I'm sorry. Could you just go to the previous one? Yes. No, not this one, the previous one. Sorry, guys. Previous one. All right. Yes, here we are. So what are the different types of services that can be outsourced and what they actually deliver? So not all offshoring is created equal. And most importantly, not all of these delivers the same value. So there are three categories: task-based outsourcing, process-based, and function-based. So in task-based, there are different services like CV formatting, data entry, job posting. Task-based basically saves time. This is where most businesses start, freeing up time on repetitive tasks. So you're buying back hour, but not necessarily driving outcome. When we talk about process-based, it saves time and it gives you an indirect ROI. So services like or activities like sourcing, pipeline, market mapping, candidate screening, workflow, etc. Now here we move from isolated tasks to structured processes. And the impact that it creates is it improves consistency, it gives you a faster turnaround times, a better utilization of onshore team members. And here, you're not just saving time, you're actually starting to influence performance. The last one is function-based outsourcing, where it owns accountability for ROI, which is a direct ROI, where services like end-to-end sourcing teams, delivery pods, full recruitment supporting functions, etc. This is where the real shift happens from support to ownership. So the impact that it creates is it gives you measurable KPIs, it gives you revenue impact, and it gives you a scalable delivery model as well. So at this time, offshoring isn't a service; it becomes a growth engine. So the question is whether it isn't about whether you're offshoring; it's what level you're operating at, and where do you truly get the delivery outcomes. So these are the different services that we talk about. Now let's talk about how do we see the ROI coming into picture with all the three, which is task, delivery, and functions. So when we talk about this task where it saves time, you start seeing the impact, and it saves 30% of your savings, and you start getting the immediate ROI from day one because it saves your recruitment consultant's time. So it starts on day one. When we talk about process-based, it takes 60 to 90 days. And over there, you save 15% of revenue. So there's an increase of 50%. And when we talk about function-based, it is 180 days. So 70% of revenue growth is where you will see. And of course, this is phase 1, 2, and 3. And that's where you start actually seeing the right ROI. Oh, Anina. Yes. The biggest mistake leaders make with offshoring, they treat it as a cheaper onshore labor. And that model always fails. Why? Because micromanagement increases, dependency remains on onshore team. There's no real shift in output or performance. Because if nothing changes except cost, nothing really changes. So that's where we need a shift, the shift that high performing firms make. So average firms offshore tasks, wherein the high performing firms offshore outcome. So investing in high performing or high impact early roles, if you want an immediate ROI from offshoring, start where it actually moves the needle, meaning sourcing and talent mapping, where it gives you speed and coverage. So it builds your strong pipeline, it expands your market reach, it reduces dependency on reactive hiring. So you don't just fill role faster, you stay ahead of demand. Then we talk about credentialing or compliance, where it reduces risk. So it ensures accuracy and consistency. It reduces compliance exposure. It protects client relationship. Because one compliance miss can cost more than entire offshore team. The third one is onboarding coordination, where time to start the compression, faster candidate mobilization, better candidate experience. It reduces drop-offs too. So revenue doesn't start at placement, it starts at onboarding. So evolve as you scale. So offshoring is not one-time decision. It is a maturity curve. The evolution journey, basically stage 1 is execution support, which is task-based, reactive, admin-heavy. So that is helpful, but it is limited. The second one is embedded delivery pods, where integrated with onshore teams. It is process driven. It is aligned with delivery goals. Now here you're building the rhythm and consistency. Then we are talking about the outcome ownership, where it is KPI-led performance, accountability for results, scalable, repeatable delivery. So at this stage, your offshore team isn't supporting your business, it's powering it. So if your offshore strategy doesn't evolve, your result won't either. So again, the question is no longer what can we offshore? It's what outcome are we ready to let go of so that we can grow faster. Now, this is what makes a 24 hours delivery cycle actually works. So a 24-hour recruitment engine supports powerful, but it only works if it is designed with an intent. The role of onshore team is to set the foundation, and the offshore success is built on onshore clarity. So we need to have clear process, so a defined workflows, standardized steps, no ambiguity in execution. Because if the process isn't clear onshore, it won't magically work offshore. Defined handovers, structured end of day transitions, clear ownership at every stage, no gaps, no duplications. The handover is where most models break or scale. Strong visibility and accountability, a real time tracking of progress, KPI driven ownership, transparent communication loops. What gets measured gets delivered. So, a continuous cycle indicator where done right, this is what you unlock a seamless 24 hours workflow, zero timeline in candidate progression, faster turnaround from sourcing to placement. So your candidate should be moving forward even while you sleep. That's not just if efficiency, that's the competitive advantage that you can think about. So a 24-hour model isn't about working long hours. It's about building a system that never stops. Moving on. And I can move forward. Yeah. So here is the operational cost difference between offshore and the onshore, that is in-house. So here you will see a clear picture of the amount or the cost that you invest in one recruitment consultant versus one recruitment consultant offshore. So again, it covers a lot of hiring costs, training, onboarding, insurance, etc. Versus the offshore recruitment cost is somewhere between 2,500 to 3,000 AUD. That's the net one. So there's no GST or VAT applicable. However, the other add-on tools could be the CRM access, because I think it's really important for offshore team members to have CRM tools so that there's no duplication. They work as an extension to your team. So CRM access, the email address under the same domain. So these are the add-on tools, but this is a clear comparison between the onshore cost versus offshore cost. This is one of the case studies where it just gives you a brief idea. So one of the customers that we are working with, and it's been 2.5 years, they are into multi-sector, and the current services that we are delivering is into blue collar and white collar roles. Of course, I've just given the impact and the result that we have delivered so far, and we're more than happy because we will be sharing the details with you. But with this, one of the customers, we have actually reduced 60% of their admin tasks. So that's where the onshore team focus now is, where they're more engaged with client conversation, building the relationship with candidates and so on. 40% faster candidate processing. And that's where we are assisting with sourcing and pre-screening support to this customer. They started with 2 resources or 2 heads. And as we speak, yes, they have upscaled eventually. And I think that's the success. And that comes over a period of time when you have built the confidence, not just with the key leaders, but then it is with the team as well, with whom you work day in and out. So it's a collaboration that is really important when it comes to offshoring.
It's really interesting for recruitment agency leaders to actually approach this for the first time. And by now, I think just about everybody's got some exposure to working with some staff in an offshored environment or in an outsourced environment, whether that's with marketing or with some admin support or whatever it might be. But when it comes down to saying, okay, a key piece of my organization, I'm now thinking about doing that in a different way, it starts to I suppose at a level of, I was going to say complexity, but we've been talking about that a lot. It adds a level of I suppose, planning that is maybe not required for some other activities. And if you're going to partner with another organisation who's going to be responsible for a good portion of a piece of business, a good portion of your business, then there's some things to think about. And it is complex because they are your staff, but they're not really your staff. They've been looked after in conjunction with another organisation. And you are responsible for their performance and for their activity, but you're sharing that with another organisation who's also got some responsibilities there. And you are needing to communicate on a daily basis and on a formal basis to make sure that everything's working as it should. But some of that responsibility is with another organisation. And the other side of it is that your processes, as Mandy has mentioned, will be very much tested. Okay, so it's not easy to just pick up something that you might be doing quite well internally and think about how to do that in a different way. Quite often, there's some actual engineering work required to make sure that that's done correctly. Sometimes IT systems need to be thought about. Sometimes processes need to be thought about. Certainly, the leadership structure and communication needs to be thought about. So when people come along and say, I think I need to do something, but how do I start? There's not necessarily a simple answer. I know that IMS works with some very small organisations, like startups of one person, and they might be successfully working with IMS. And the way that they do that is going to be very different from a larger organisation that's trying to fit this into something that is already quite complex and got quite a leadership structure in place. And so the manner in which you do it and how you do that is something that requires some forethought. It's not something you're going to get done tomorrow, although magic can happen sometimes when you've got a challenge that needs to be sorted out. And so these are the sorts of questions you should be asking, of saying, well, what outcomes are we trying to improve? And it's not just cost, as we've been talking about, but it's things like speed and margin and capacity and risk, compliance components. There's a whole range of things in there that are within your organisation and you might be looking to do in a slightly different way. Which processes are ready for standardization is important because, like I said, something that works when everybody's sitting in the one room and being able to ask questions for the person next to them might not work in a slightly more formal environment when some of those people are now part of that process and in a different location. I'm always amused by the question about we don't have enough volume to justify what we're doing, because I'm yet to find a recruitment organisation that gets to about lunchtime during the day and says, yeah, we've got nothing left to do today. I mean, that is just not how recruitment works. There's always more to do. There's always things that you never get to. And even if you decide to work with an offshore organisation because of a particular task, a particular function, and you're unsure if that's a full requirement, there's always ways of getting additional benefit out of the people that you're working with. And the great question of who owns the offshore performance internally is very, very important. I usually put that back on the recruitment agency to say that you need internal champions, you need very clear communication, you need to structure your organisation and the way you're working with your offshore partner in a manner that is going to be clear and open and honest with each other, and great metrics which are not able to be disputed, as all metrics should be. So think Nigel Haas is sitting on your corner. You know, you've got to be able to define things that are correctly measurable, that you can define and discuss and see the trends over time, and evaluate if something else needs to be done, other metrics, other changes to the process, whatever it might be. So offshore performance is a dual activity, but a lot of the emphasis needs to come from the onshore team. And of course, you've got to decide what you're optimizing for. So what are you working with? Why are you doing this in the first place? It's interesting with the rise of technology that some of those questions are starting to change. So for an organization, for example, that uses formatted resumes, that might have been a reason for getting an offshore team involved, because that might be a cost and a purely administrative function. But now that's a function that is done mostly by technology, and so other options are available. But for capability, it might be compliance, it might be the way that you manage your candidates, it might be the way that you look after your clients in terms of some post-onboarding activities. There's a whole range of activities that maybe you're doing well, maybe you'd like to do better, and you can put some energy into that. Most of the time, though, people need great candidates in a very good amount of time so that they can satisfy their clients' needs. And most of the focus is around that candidate activity and the candidate process. So when you're starting to think about this, take some time, make sure that your leadership team comes along with you, make sure that your staff come along with you, make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons, make sure that you're approaching it in a manner that is not maybe based on pub talk or things that didn't work 5 years ago, but you're actually rethinking about it, getting some good case studies and seeing how it might apply to your business.
Thank you very much, both of you. I know Chris has put somebody's put their hand up. Was it Steve? Can you put your questions into either the chat or the Q&A? And Mandy and Rod will answer them. So I might just open that up right now. Because we've got 2 participants raising hands, but we need you to put the questions in the chat. So will the slides be shared afterwards, Tom? Yes, they absolutely will. But I know that we've got a couple of questions here, so we'll wait for those to come through. I wanted to ask a question. I know you talked about the idea of getting your process sound, and obviously if you've got a poor process, it's going to remain a poor process if it goes offshore. Mandy, how involved do you get in terms of working with your clients when you perceive something to be a process that maybe needs to be improved upon before you then take it on and become a working partner with that client?
So Lesley, it's our operations team. So yes, the first conversation starts with me. And then, of course, it's about exploratory, wherein we are trying to understand more about the business. What are the current pain areas? How does it look like? Where is the onshore team investing more time? What can be offshore? So it's more like a conversation. It's more like getting more into the business and understanding some part where they don't even realize that these are the problems, and that's where we get into deep conversation. Once we understand the pain areas and the services that needs to be outsourced is when our operations team, delivery team comes into picture. And IMS is heavily, they have actually invested a lot in leadership teams. So we are heavily leadership driven organization. So we have a designated account manager that works on every account along with the team leader and operations manager. So they will get into a conversation, and then there's a proper implementation that happens where we want to understand the SOP. What is the current process that the onshore team is following that needs to be followed by the offshore team? And in that implementation phase as well, there's a training where we want to understand the way the company operates. So IMS provides the trained resources, so they understand recruitment, they understand different CRMs, portals, job boards, etc. However, there's a different way of operating of every organization. So in that implementation phase, we actually understand the process. And then, of course, we record the session as well with our customers' consent so that in the future, if they want to upscale, they don't have to train the resources. So during the implementation phase, the account manager, the L&D point of contact, as in the L&D manager, will also be there so that in the future, the L&D team is there to train the resources or the team they want to upscale. So team works hand in hand. And that's where we say that we work as an extension to the team. So first in the implementation phase, of course, we want to understand the entire process. Once the team is absolutely onboarded, they start operating. And there's the team is actually part of the team, part of the onshore team. Hence, they are part of morning catch-ups or day-end catch-ups. A weekly performance catch-up also happens where we want to understand, we want to get the feedback, how the team is performing and so on. So we work hand in hand. And once the performance is streamlined and business is as usual. We shift the performance review meetings on fortnightly or monthly basis. But initially, it's all about collaboration, more conversation, feedback, and so on.
Great. Thanks, Mandy.
Actually, it is worth noting just on that I've especially for rapidly growing or expanding organizations, sometimes they actually don't have the processes in place. And I have seen situations where IMS has been able to pull together some processes that they've, best practices, if you like, from what they've been doing with other organizations and, share those and help people get started in that activity and bring them probably up to the level that they need to be able to successfully outsource.
Yeah, yeah. I might just read off some of the questions. We've got a comment here from Suleen that the issue for us is the risk of the workers being seen as employees of the business, which gets complicated with government contracts when people are offshore, have access to personal data in terms of the Privacy Act, because obviously they're accessing systems here onshore in Australia.
I can answer that, and Rod, feel free to add in there. So it's been 20 years, and we have, so we are a GDPR compliant organization. We are ISO, HIPAA, Cyber Essentials. So we have all the certifications in place. Before we partner with any customer, first we had the NDA, and then, of course, the agreement and so on. So we currently have more than 3,000 recruitment consultants operating from 3 delivery locations. And our resources work as an extension to all the accounts, more than 300 staffing clients as we speak. They work on remote desktop environment, which means, of course, they work in their environment. Anything that's been saved, anything that's been done is absolutely onto their servers and not to IMS's service. So we ensure that when it especially comes to data security, IMS plays a really, they are absolutely critical with this advantage, with this element.
Yeah.
Rod, do you want to add anything?
Oh yeah, look, it's been interesting to watch IMS's growth in Australia because Canberra is always a special case, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. I lived there for a while, so I can claim that. Some of the government contracts needed very careful thought and a little bit of consultation. And IMS now has some clients that are working through those government contracts to government agencies. And that's obviously a little bit restricted. I mean, we're not talking defence or foreign affairs or anything like that, but in the more general agencies. And I am not sure of any other offshoring organisation that's been able to come up to that standard, but it's possible and is currently working.
Fantastic. We do have a question here, which probably comes back to your comment that you just made, Mandy, around the 3 locations that you work in. So maybe you can let our audience know what those locations are.
Sure. So the head office is in India, Ahmedabad, from where I operate. That is in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, west part of India. Another delivery location that we have is in Rajasthan, Jaipur. And then we have the Philippines. Manila is our 3rd delivery location. So these are the 3 delivery centers that we have.
Excellent. Thank you, Helen. I think that answers your question. Steve wanted to ask about cultural and operation integration. And I think this is something that I really remember as a standout when I first got to know IMS, which was, Rod, probably 25 years ago, I think, in another life. How deeply and thoroughly you do absorb yourselves into the culture and the DNA of the companies that you work with. So Mandy, maybe you can talk us through that.
Yes. So again, every company operates differently. They have different cultures, they have different ethos, and that's where when I mentioned earlier about the implementation phase. So implementation could be for 3 days, 1 week, or maybe 2 weeks as well. The way we start is, of course, first, all the dedicated resources who works on a dedicated account. It is essential for them to understand what are the ethos, what are the values of the company, how do they operate, how do they communicate, not just internally, but then with their candidates and with their clients as well. And that's where, and the companies who actually consider offshore as a true extension, they ensure that the entire cultural training and the ethos or the values of the companies are driven and they are trained with all. And that's where we have seen some of the clients, of course, I can't name them, but then some of our clients, they actually come here to India and they spend 1 month to 2 to 3 months. They spend time with their team here. They ensure the entire training, end-to-end training is done over from here. And then, of course, they do call some of the people to their companies in the UK, Australia, or the US as well. So it is really important for us to ensure that we are absolutely getting into the culture of the company that we are working with so that we speak the same language with the candidates.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where
Yeah.
the implementation part. Sorry, go ahead, Rod.
Yeah, no, look, that's really important. I mean, the training is more than can you do this process? It has to be, can I do this process to meet the values and the culture of the organization I'm working with? And if you don't do that, then it really does come along like a Telstra call center environment, doesn't it? And so that's not the goal. It's very much more integrated than that, and that doesn't come easily. There's a lot of work required on both sides to focus on that and get that right.
Fantastic. Final question, I think, here from Tom, which is you mentioned how tech has changed the need for offshore resources to format agency CVs. What percentage of other tasks currently offshore do you think will be automated or handled by AI in the coming year or so? Good question.
That's a great question. Well, it is because nobody knows the answer, and so therefore it's a great topic of debate rather than a great, there's no answer to it. I'll give an answer from, I mean, I'm in a fortunate position where I go and talk to lots of recruitment agencies, and you can imagine that technology is just one of the very, very important topics for 2026. And everybody, I think, is going to approach it in a slightly different way. And people have, I suppose, on a continuum of it's going to make no change. We're going to be very human centric through to this is great. I can get rid of the humans and we're going to do this with technology. Somewhere in the middle is everybody's answer. And the impact on particular processes and how processes are going to be looked after, I think, is yet to be worked out. But as you can imagine, an organisation like IMS, which is a provider of humans, is working very, very hard on that question as well. Over to you, Mandy.
Yeah, thank you, Rod. And that's where one of our divisions within IMS Group is IMS Nuclei, which provides IT solutions, managed IT services. And there's a lot of automation and AI implementation that has happened on many of the accounts. Again, the Nuclei team that we have, they get into a conversation just the way we do. They also get into a conversation, then they want to understand what all parts or what all activities they want to automate, or maybe where do they need AI intervention. Again, it's not about just saying yes for everything. It's just about understanding where human intervention is required and where automation can play a role, like CV formatting or mapping. So there are different tools that we have in place. And of course, the idea is not just to implement those automation in any of the processes, but primarily to understand, do we really need that automation in place? Where do we see human intervention is required and where the automation can play a role? So yeah, within IMS Group, we have multiple divisions, and IMS Nuclei is one of the brands where we talk about automation, we talk about managed IT services, and so on.
Great, thanks, Mandy. Another question here from Sulsha. For businesses currently evaluating multiple offshore providers, what are the critical areas to probe beyond pricing to truly understand capability, scalability, and risk? Who wants to take that one?
Let me.
Go ahead, Rod.
I think a few of the things have been talked about now already. It's really interesting when there's different models that you might. Okay, you can go to a few organisations. I think the market is rapidly changing in terms of the providers that are out there, and what those organisations can provide you is very different. Not only the way they're priced, but what's included in the pricing and where the responsibility for certain activities lies. And along with that, is variations in terms of privacy, cybersecurity, the sorts of things that we just talked about in terms of Canberra and so on. So I think that goes back almost to the beginning of the conversation this morning, which was this is not necessarily a price conversation. This is how can I get a solution for the environment that I need to provide to myself and my clients. And I think that you almost need to say, how's this going to work in 6 months' time when I need to either scale it or when a couple of staff members change or when a process needs to change? Where does the responsibility for all of that lie and how is that going to be implemented? Rather than what you might do, what the first invoice might be, or how you're going to onboard, or even, this is a really complex one, or even the experience of the person who's being presented to you. How does that impact on day one as opposed to how that might be in 6 months' time when everything is in an ongoing process? So I think it's a really interesting question. And the fact that that question is around at the moment is partially showing the rise in complexity and maturity of what's going on in the offshoring market. On a global scale, Australia is a long way behind, but catching rapidly. The United States especially has been doing this for a hell of a long time. The United Kingdom has been very, very strong on it for a good period. Some other countries that operate in similar ways to what Australia does have been pushing this for a long time as well. But Australia's really just had a rapid rise in the last 5 years or so.
We have been asked by Nathan if you could go back to the cost comparison slide. I think he wants to clarify some of the tech costs that are being included in that.
That's a good question, Nathan. I'm going to talk to that one. Not that I know IMS's numbers, but I think if you're outsourcing a position, and so the human is now at a different cost, because those processes are on your environment, on your server, on your activity, then you will need another CRM license. You possibly need another LinkedIn license and that. And whether you pay for that directly and provide it to the person, or whether the offshore person pays for it and charges you for it, there's going to be other costs for the seat or for the desk, if you like, just like you have for your internal staff. What changes is maybe the training, the leadership, the performance management, the replacement, all of those sorts of things which are listed in that activity. Is that close enough, Mandy?
Yes, absolutely, Rod. And with the offshore recruitment cost, it's not just the resource cost that we are referring to, because along with the resources, as I mentioned earlier, we provide account managers as well. Now, of course, some of the accounts that we are, or some of the customers that we are working with, they have dedicated account managers as well. Well, that is an add-on cost. But our responsibility is to ensure that with your resources, be it for a team of 2 people, 5, 10, we will provide an account manager primarily to ensure that your team is not investing time in managing the offshore resources. It is account manager's responsibility to ensure the SLAs are met, the KRAs are met, the absenteeism that needs to be taken care, that is covered, and so on, plus the performance report that needs to be sent. So that's where I say that we work truly as an extension to the team. And as Rod mentioned, yes, the add-on cost is about the email, so that when the offshore team is reaching out to candidates, they're representing themselves from the company, and hence the email address and the same domain is required.
Thank you. Another question here coming through. Oh, another 2 questions. With the ease of hiring across borders and the rise of employee of record firms like Deal or Remote, what do you think are the advantages or disadvantages that you see of outsourcing or offshoring versus building the team yourself?
Yeah, that's good, isn't it? There's many solutions, isn't there? And it depends what level of I suppose risk and partnership you want to take. So in the scale from I'm going to hire somebody in another country and I'm going to pay them with a PayPal payment each month, don't do that, please. You're probably breaking a whole bunch of laws, including Australian ones. And so I'm glad you've said employment of record. because that's almost the next stage where, for whatever reason, you found one or two or a few people that you might want to work with, maybe based on past relationships or something. Then use an EOR organisation and do that properly and make sure the taxes are paid and make sure you're legally compliant. That's great. There's a cost to that, of course. And then I suppose the things that Mandy's been talking about are saying IMS comes in at the position where where you're looking for a partnership, where it's actually a business process outsourcing environment, where it's a partnership between the two organisations, and the contract is between the organisations. The contract is not with the individual.
Yeah.
Great. Another question here. Beyond cost differences, how should businesses think about choosing between locations like Philippines versus India in terms of delivery, quality, cultural alignment, and scalability?
I can answer that, and feel free to add, Rod. We operate same, be it in India or in the Philippines. So when it comes to training, when it comes to cultural training as well, yes, absolutely. IMS operates in a very similar way with the Indian team and with the Philippines team. And again, we give both the options to our customers. It is absolutely their decision if they want to go with the Indian resources or the Philippines resources. So nothing changes. Process remains the same, leadership remains the same. Everyone is trained and coached on the same grounds. Go ahead, Rod.
Yeah, look, I think there's a term called nearshore, and I'd include India and Philippines as nearshore into Australia, but on a global scale, yep, Eastern Europe, some African countries, strong in this area, Central America, Southern America. There's a lot of choices out there about offshoring and which countries are really well set up for it and put a lot of energy into it to make sure it's a valid industry for that country. Most people in Australia go to India or the Philippines, and I think that makes sense. Other Asian countries in different areas do really well. Like if you're trying to get IT work done, then Vietnam is great. And so there's a whole range of variations there. And I just think, it comes down to sometimes a little bit of preference. And everybody's probably got some history and wants to work in a certain way. And IMS is making sure that it covers that by being in both locations.
And just to add on to Rod, all our resources, be it in India or in the Philippines, they operate from office, not from the work from home setup. So, as I said, nothing changes, be it in India or in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We have got another question, which was from Nathan about same job, same pay. And I don't know whether you want to tackle that or not, but I would believe there is not an issue, Nathan, but I'm happy to chat to you about that offline if you want. So I know there's some.
Well, it's a company to company contracted arrangement with IMS, so certainly doesn't come into that consideration. If you're doing something else, there's already been some cases, especially if you're treating an offshore person exactly like you would treat an Australian person, then and it's an individual arrangement, then there's certainly some things to consider at that point.
Yeah. Oh, hang on. They're coming through thick and fast today. Another question. Many offshore companies are offering remote professionals as a model. How should businesses evaluate this against a structured offshore setup when it comes to consistency, performance, and long-term outcomes?
I assume that means hire an individual as opposed to work with a company.
Looks like it. That's how I would interpret it.
Yeah. And look, and I think that comes back to that continuum, that scale of saying, do you want to be absolutely responsible for the individuals that are now working for you in an offshore environment? Or do you want to work with an organization who's going to accept a whole heap of responsibility in that area? And, I can understand some arguments for both sides. IMS has got a model that it works with.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. I believe you have a couple more slides to go through before we finish.
Right. So, yeah, these are the key takeaways with today's discussion. where we measure outcomes and not the headcounts. And I think I've covered that in depth today. So we should be focusing more on value delivered by the offshore teams and not just the number of FTEs or the hourly rates. Of course, design of the capability, and it's not cost. So invest in building the robust capabilities and the processes for long-term success, not just to cheap labor, not on the hourly basis, not just probably a part-time or for a few days and so on. And yeah, give it time to work. Strategic offshoring delivers measurable ROI, and that's what we have experienced with some of our clients who are working with us for 15 years, 17 years, 9 years, 10 years, and so on. So you got to give that time, have that faith, have difficult conversation, have feedback sessions more often, and just share as is. Yeah, so that's where we actually believe, and that's where we also say that we work with you and not for you. So we work as a offshore delivery partner, and not just another supplier. So you've got to give some time to make this work. Yeah, so that's the checklist. Feel free to scan it, or you can also send me an email. You will be able to download the checklist that we have in place where it has phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. So go through that checklist, and I'm sure it will give you a better quality as well. If you have any further questions, more than happy to jump on an exploratory call, and Rod and I will be happy to discuss what are we currently doing for majority of our Australian clients, where it's working, what's it's not working. So of course, we always share do's and don'ts before we get into a partnership. Yeah, so that's the question that has changed. So in 2026, your competitive edge will be defined by your delivery capability. So the question isn't, should we offshore? It has to be, are we building a business that can deliver more, faster, and better without burning out every people driving it?
Actually, I just have to say that last slide is actually a client on stage at IMS at a conference, I think.
Yes.
And so I do recognize a few of the faces in there, includes a couple of Australians.
Yes.
So,
So
yeah.
we just celebrated our 20th year in the month of January, and yes, Rod was also there. So that is always a pleasure to have Rod with us once or twice in a year. And that's where we have to actually invite our clients, and most of them really want to be a part of this gala, which we celebrate in every January. And that's where the picture is coming from. They love to enjoy the success with the team.
Nice to see a few members in there, which is good.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you for this
Thank
insightful
you.
session, Lesley, Rod, and Mandy. Thank you for joining us. Mandy, Rod, I just want to say a big thank you. Everybody that attended this morning, thank you again. As I said, you will get the slides and the recording sent to you. I also want to mention that Mandy is traveling to Australia in July. She'll be joining us at our conference, and you'll be over for a few weeks, I believe. So there's also an opportunity to meet Mandy and have a chat. And obviously Rod's in Australia full time. So please do reach out if you've got any more questions, or feel free to come through me. But thank you everyone for joining. Rod, Mandy, thanks. That's been really interesting, and I think has given us a really different lens on this the topic of offshoring, which I think is something that we've often been asked by members. So I was really pleased that we were able to do this with you today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lesley. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks everyone.
It's a
Have a
pleasure.
fantastic day. Thanks for joining.
Yes.